Sorry about that, babe.
TMNT 2 the arcade game is a side-scrolling beat-em-up that was developed by Konami and published by Ultra Games, released in North America on December 14th of 1990. As you probably could infer from the title, this was a home system port of the arcade game. Now, this is not going to be a comparison video as my experience with the arcade title is rather limited, but I will say from what I remember playing and what I've seen recently, the NES port did a pretty dang good job. Some differences are obvious, with the arcade version having higher graphical quality, music quality, enemy placement, more dialogue in the cutscenes, 2-player max versus 4-player max, and so on. But what's pretty cool is the NES version actually got 2 extra levels in that of Let's Melt Snow and Rebuild New York City, with an end boss of Tora, and Let's Defeat the Enemy's Ninja Magic with the end boss of Shogun, right before the Technodrome. Another big change between the two is the parking garage level sees a mutated version of Baxter Stockman as the boss in the NES version, where the arcade version sees a duo boss return of Bebop and Rocksteady. I touched on it briefly already, but TMNT 2 the arcade game could be played either 1-player or 2-player. I'll be focusing on the 1-player version mostly in this review, as I'm approaching 35 years old and I'm not playing my games with friends as much these days. That being said, I did play this game quite a bit with my friend Kevin back around the time I was in college on the 2-player co-op mode, and I remember I was having a blast. We ended up getting to Scene 6 in the dojo and our journey ended there, unfortunately. So it was nice to pick up the slack here in 2023 and not only beat the game, but we decimated it. So yeah, the 2-player co-op mode is awesome if you can find a partner to play it with. In the meantime, if you want to see me decimating the game, check out my no-death run guide, my no-death runs with all 4 turtles, as well as my segmented no-hit boss attempts in the TMNT 2 NES playlist in the pinned comment description below. But enough self-advertising. So for the game's story, it's a bit odd. The instruction manual pretty much frames it as a follow-up to the 1990 live-action Turtles movie, where the game itself kind of feels like an extension of the cartoon. But the long and short of it is this. The Turtles helped make Manhattan safe again by sending Shredder to the local landfill. All seemed well until 2 intergalactic bounty hunters came for the Turtles' heads because of the high price that Shredder put on them. Yep, he's back. Coming back to New York through garbage ships and literal garbage, he started training the foot soldiers and recruiting said bounty hunters Tora and Shogun, the NES exclusives, to take out our heroes. Along with this is the standard April O'Neil gets kidnapped, Splinter gets taken hostage at some point, yada yada. Now you gotta kick some shell and make New York safe again. Pretty standard stuff, but it's a beat 'em up, so you shouldn't really expect anything too wild. Getting started, you have your choice of either Leonardo, Michelangelo, Donatello, or Raphael. From my experience, there's really no difference between the turtles other than the sprites and the weapons. Yeah, that means even short weapons like Raph's seem to have the same hitboxes as Donatello. That's a pretty big difference when compared especially to the first NES game where Donatello is just straight up goated because of his weapon. You will clobber your way through 7 scenes, some with multiple parts, essentially leading to 10 levels and subsequently 10 bosses. Levels including April's hot Midtown loft, Times Square, the Soho sewer system, Snowy Central Park, Vinny's valet parking garage, Madison Square Avenue, Rockefeller Expressway, the Rock Quarry Factory, House of Shogun, and finally the Technodrome. I find that the levels have a pretty good variety and the NES exclusives are a much needed deviation, helping add to the overall freshness of the game. Some might say that those levels are a bit out of place, where I think they interject much needed life. All things considered, I also feel like TMNT 2 the arcade game does a great job with enemy variety. Sure, the majority of the enemies that you will face are foot soldiers, but they are a varied bunch. For example, there's ninja foot soldiers, katana wielding foot soldiers, boomerang throwing foot soldiers, sledgehammer foot soldiers, and more. They each have their own colors and sprites, attack patterns, and they keep you on your toes. Outside of that, you'll also encounter some enemies like the historic Mousers, Roadkill Rodney, Frosty the Hitman, yeah, that's really the name, and even well-named beasts like Vincent Van Graal. On the boss front, aside from the aforementioned Tora and Shogun, you'll also see all the familiar TMNT baddies like Bebop, Rocksteady, Baxter, Krang, stone warriors like Granitor, General Trag, and of course, Shredder. Graphically, TMNT 2 the arcade game is a pleasing one. The color palette is solid, and I feel like the game doesn't overdo it, keeping things looking very sharp and having colors that catch the eye in both the cutscenes as well as the general gameplay. The sprite work isn't overly complicated, but in my opinion it doesn't need to be. The HUD is tight, displaying your points, life meter, and number of lives, as well as filling some vacant space with that logo. And the playing field and levels are ripe with life. I personally enjoy things such as the foreground fire in Scene 1, and minor things such as the Mousers busting out of the walls, foot soldiers appearing from the dojo doors, but perhaps the thing that I like the most about the graphics, which in turn ties into the game engine / optimization / hardware, is the fact it doesn't flicker too much, which is great considering at times there are many sprites on the screen, and things can sure get hectic in a beat 'em up. Musically, this may be a little bit of a hot take, but to put it bluntly, it's just solid. I can't say that there's really any tracks in the game that are up there with my favorites on the system, but there's none that make me want to gouge my ears off either. There's a few different variations of the Turtles theme. I feel like the boss music and the soundtrack to the dojo and Technodrome help convey the weight of the task at hand. But if you know me, you could probably guess my favorite track from the game, and that's that of the Soho Sewer System, which in my opinion is the most atmospheric. I love immersion. So what else can I say? Again, there's nothing really bad about the soundtrack. It's quite good, but it just doesn't blow me away personally. Now for the controls. Having a beat 'em up on a 2-button system has always been an interesting thing for me in the sense of, did the devs do a good job making it seem dynamic with limited options? And of course, is it intuitive and smooth? The answer to these questions is yes. You move your turtle with the D-pad in every direction, including diagonally. You jump with the A button, attack with the B. You could do a jump attack if you press the A button just before pressing the B button, which is the most devastating attack in the game. And you could also jump kick by pressing B while holding left or right while in the air. These last two attacks will be your lifeline throughout the game as they do the most damage and give you the most leeway and iframes. Basically, you don't really need to do normal attacks, as funny as that may sound, as I find that normal attacks put you in harm's way too often and they don't do too much damage. The controls are very satisfying when you get into those kicking grooves or stun locking a boss with jump attacks, so I can't complain here either. Gameplay and fun factor. TMNT 2, the arcade game, can be a bit challenging for newcomers. As is the case with most old games, it's all about practice and learning the ropes. Going into this willy-nilly and just smashing the attack button will surely lead to a quick game over. Once you master the aforementioned jump attacks and jump kicks, things do start getting easier. Coupling that with the growing knowledge of the foot soldiers and various enemy patterns, you'll be making your way to that Technodrome in no time. You have 3 total continues to beat the game, but thankfully you're also able to add lives for every 200 knockout blows that you deal to the enemies. With over 700 enemies in the game, there's a few lives to gather. And there's actually a couple of decent farming spots like the motorcycle foot soldiers or the Mousers that the first Baxter boss spits out, which is pretty cool for somebody that might be struggling. Also, if you are struggling through your levels, thankfully most contain pizzas which replenish your health. Oftentimes these pizzas are close, if not right next to, the bosses. So basically the game is telling you that you need to get through most of the level before it helps you, but the help is still there. Some bosses can definitely be a pain. I'm looking at you, Granitor and Krang, for your massive HP pools, Shogun for your weird head RNG, and Shredder for those that don't know the quote, pattern. But is the game fun? Resoundingly, yes. It's fun. In fact, it's very fun. With good level and enemy variety, a slick combat system, minimal flicker, solid graphics and sound, an adequate length, clocking in roughly around an hour for those that don't struggle too much, you do feel like you get your money's worth with this one. Obviously, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 varies dramatically from its predecessor. Which game do I prefer more, the first or the second? I guess that's kind of a day-to-day thing with me, but I really do appreciate the variety of gameplay that both games have to offer. I give TMNT 2, the arcade game on the NES, a 7.5 out of 10. I already went over the good things a million times, so I'll just tell you quickly why it gets docked a few points for my personal rating. A lot of the bosses are killed with a very samey style, meaning lots of jump kicks, and those with high HP pools, the fights could just feel a bit sloggy. Coupled with that, I mentioned earlier that the regular attacks are almost pointless and essentially you'll just be jump attacking the entire game, which also hurts combat variety a bit. The music also isn't my favorite, but not necessarily bad or negative. It just didn't wow me, and the same goes for the graphics. Essentially to me, TMNT 2 the arcade game is the epitome of a solid yet unspectacular game. It's certainly still worth a play, and it's not worth an arm and a leg monetarily still, so I say, give it a go. If you've enjoyed this review, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing if you haven't already. If you want to see the rest of my TMNT 2 the arcade game coverage featuring shorts, challenge runs, and an unboxing, check out the links in the pinned comment description below, or the overlay at the end of this video. Take care.